Hello and welcome to the Atlanta Opera Das Rheingold limited series where we explore topics around Richard Wagner's Das Rheingold and the Ring Cycle. I'm your host, Tomer Zvulun, and I'm the Artistic and General Director of the Atlanta Opera. On today's episode, I will be speaking with two amazing opera singers and incredible friends, Greer Grimsley and Nicholas Brownlee, about their experiences singing the role of Wotan, the god of all gods, in Wagner's Ring Cycle. Welcome, guys. Good to see you.
Great to see you, too.
Great to see you.
Greer, let's start with you. We're looking forward to having you sing the role of Wotan in our very soon upcoming production of Das Rheingold here in Atlanta. And I wanted to ask you about your experience with Wagner, your experience with the Ring Cycle. What was your first Wotan? How many Wagner rings did you sing since then?
Oh my gosh. You know what? I've lost track. I'm not one of these guys that counts, all of these things, but I've done quite a few rings. Just in Seattle, I've done 3 complete rings over the span of, they bring it back and I would do all of the Wotans. My first Wotan was in 2005.
In Seattle?
In Seattle, yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And then after that, it just kind of started. Once you sort of prove yourself in this repertoire, it sort of takes a life of its own.
And then you sang it also, at least from what I remember, is like the Metropolitan Opera, San Francisco Opera, Seattle 3 times, probably a few other places.
Oh yeah,
yeah, incredible.
Did it at the Met with the Lepage set. And I that's when I learned I had really good balance. So, with all the moving planks.
You're survivor. You survived the Lepage production. Yeah. I just have to share with everybody the first time I worked on a Ring Cycle was with you in Seattle in 2009. And I'll never forget in month number 3, we were rehearsing Siegfried after 3 months of doing all the shows day after day. And Greer never marks. Like, I don't know if you still do that, but you just don't mark. And at some point I turned to you and I said, "Hey, Greer, don't you have a mark?" And you said, "Oh, well, it keeps me greased. It keeps me greased." And I'll never forget that answer. Yeah. So it keeps him greased.
I never learned that. I'm amazed at some of my colleagues who can do that and it's more, I hear that more in an Italian repertoire where they're able to mark and come in and out and drop an octave. And it just, for me, I if I can sing half voice, that's my marking, but I just never learned that skill. But also, it just kind of keeps me sort of looking for new opportunities to find different things as well. And I don't do, and if I have to mark, or if I am marking, if I choose to mark, it's not the same animal. It's not the same thing. When you're singing, close to what you're going to sing in performance, there are different things, different timings that you can find.
Yeah. Well, I can't wait to do this with you on our own. That's going to be amazing.
I'm really psyched. I'm really jazzed about this.
Now, Nick, let's talk about you for a second. First of all, thank you for calling us. You're in Germany. You're in Munich doing Freischütz, doing a little opera there. And I'm super excited about you because, when I heard you singing Wagner for the first time, I thought, all right, this guy has arrived. This is it. This is the next Wotan for the next 30, 40 years. I'm really excited about where your career is going. And you just did your first Rheingold, your first Wotan in Dallas with me last month. How was that experience?
Well, first I want to say that Greer's first full ring in 2005, I was a sophomore in high school. And so, timing is different for all of us. But it's one of those things, Greer, I don't know if you had the experience. I think your first thing was Tellerremonte, maybe, which is like such a beast. It's ridiculous to even fathom doing Tellerremonte as your first Wagner opera, which is like the voice shredder of a century in Lohengrin. But there's this thing that happens, you make your way and everyone tells you 24, 25, 26, 27, oh, you're going to do Wagner. And then you offer a Wagner aria in an audition and they're like, come on, you're too young. And then there's this moment where instead of a 2 in front of your first number in your age, you get a 3, and all of a sudden it's okay. So at 29 years, 11 months, I couldn't sing Die Frist des Sturm as a starter. But at 30 years, 1 day, I could. And so I just sort of took that and ran with it. And now I've done Hans Sachs, I've done Corvinal, I'm doing my first Dutchman this summer in Santa Fe. And so I've really leaned into this big Wagner crazy baritone, bass baritone, call it what you want to call it, but it's all sort of one Fach. And for me, what was so exciting about doing this first Rheingold is I'm in the stage of my career now, much like Greer was at my age, I'm sure, where if the phone rings, you pick it up and you get on a plane. There is no, oh, maybe, oh, if, oh, I just say yes to everything and then figure it out when I get there. But what was great about this Rheingold, it was a 3-year plan. So I got the call, 2.5, 3 years before. I had plenty of time to rehearse it. I had plenty of time to prepare it. And when we came into this production, I was as solid and felt as good as you can feel as doing a role debut on a first day. I felt like I knew the piece. Of course, you never know the piece, right? There's something to garner and learn until you go in the ground with these operas, especially. But what was so great about this Wotan was not just, I must say, Tomer's directing was incredible. So that was a highlight. But the big part of it was I was around a bunch of other role debuts. And so I think there was only 2 people out of the 14 named principals in the opera that had done the opera before. And we all sort of like found it ourselves. We all explored. We were able to, look, when you do a repeat thing, I've done Leporello 5 times. So when I'm in the room for Leporello in a new production and there's someone in the cast who's doing it for the first time, you of course want to accommodate all of their questions. But to some degree, you're thinking like, Mazzetto just does this because Mazzetto does it. Like, don't ask those questions. Let's go. Come on. Can we end rehearsal early? Right? But when you're doing it with all role debuts, there's this comfort, there's this safety in asking these questions, exploring these big, huge ideas. And not only that, but getting to sing it in over and over and over again. And much like Greer, I'm a big proponent in this music of the more you can sing it in rehearsal, the more confident you're going to be on opening night. And so maybe there's a day where you wake up and you're a little thick, you're a little dusty, and E natural doesn't want to quite sit where you think E natural should sit, or maybe you overblow an F sharp, or you get in trouble for 2 pages and you have to work yourself out of it. I would much rather do that in a rehearsal room. And so with Dallas, we were afforded that time and that opportunity to sort of get yourself into trouble, then get yourself out. And by the time we got to opening night, I felt incredibly confident in the product that we had to show for people.
Yeah, that's great. The thing about The Ring that is on the surface, it's this Wagner multiverse. It's this incredible fantasy, Lord of the Rings, Marvel characters with dragons and giants and dwarves and treasures and rings and all this stuff. But underneath it all, the reason that The Ring is so powerful, in my opinion, is that it's about identity and belonging, and about families and daughters and fathers and sons and brothers and love and the thing that make us human beings. And full disclosure, all 3 of us have daughters.
Yeah.
And another full disclosure, for my birthday, I got a shirt that said, "You can't scare me. I have 2 daughters."
Me too, for sure. That's
yeah.
true.
And the reason I'm bringing this up is that I feel like that experience colors things when you do a masterwork like The Ring, because it's so much about family. It's so much about what makes us human being and connect to others. Greer, 2005, your daughter is probably my daughter's age. 2023, your daughter's getting married.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thanks.
How this journey of you as a human being colored the way you think about The Ring, about Wotan?
Well, I think you can't, especially with with the farewell in Valkyrie, there's no getting around. If you're connected to the text and you're to use a much used acting terminology, if you are staying in the moment, there's no way you can't and you can't help but think about your daughter and saying goodbye to her forever. It's not there is and the thing is that at different stages, it's still resonates here, and it hasn't gotten. I haven't gotten to the point where I do not, that it doesn't, zing me emotionally when I'm singing that scene. And it's usually, and when I'm brushing up Valkyrie, I tend to not brush up that final scene until the very end. I sort of avoid it because it does touch something that is could be very painful, and you hope never has to happen. It's an amazing journey, and that is, what people always ask, what is it like playing a god? I don't even think about it. I mean, because it's about the relationships between the other colleagues on stage, and so we put this idea of or a package on all of us that, okay, this is the god of this and this is the god of that, but we're still telling a human story. And back when these sagas were being written, that's all we knew. We sort of extrapolated what gods were from our human experience. And so of course they're full of these wild emotions, from jealousy to anger. You would think that, most of us think of in religious philosophy, it's about a greater whole and compassion. Well, it was, when these sagas were written, it was a tough life. People were trying to survive. It was not an easy time. So our fellow human beings created this saga about the king of the gods as a way, I think, to justify how violent and how hard their lives were at that point as well.
Yeah.
And if I may, I think it's also like, this is where you have to rely on your colleagues so much, because Greer, as low voices, we're almost exclusively playing high-level priests, Scarpia, high priest, and Dalila. We're playing gods. We're playing all these people who are so elevated in society, mostly because like low voices rule and we're the best and we play all the cool people. But also, it's a reliant, and this is what I found in Rheingold as well. It's what I found in Enrico and Anna Bolena as well. When you're playing, King Henry VIII, you're so reliant on your other colleagues, because a king is only a king based on people around him and on their reactions. So when you move, they got to get out of the way. If they don't get out of the way, you look weak. And so I found that so much in Rheingold, where it was sort of like, if I'm going to listen within reason and safety, but my spear goes where my spear goes. It's connected to my hand. It's your duty to get out of the way of it. And so that's sort of what at least for me makes you more of a king, makes you more stately. So for you to say, I don't think about being a king, I don't either, if I'm being honest. Like, I don't think about being the highest status person on stage. That's up to everyone else to move, because what's interesting is when a god or when a king or when some high priest, when he reacts and behaves like an absolutely normal person while everyone else is in fear of him, there's the terrifying aspect of it. There's that's the little gem, the little pearl of fear, of anxiety, of the whole tension, everybody being on their toes. And so I agree completely. Like, as soon as Tomer and I talked about this a lot. As soon as you puff out that chest and raise those elbows and get up and be a king, you've cut your legs out from under you, which is sort of like the antithesis of what you would think. So it's a fascinating experience.
Now, Nick, you just did your first one, and in your first Wotan, what what surprised you? What were the challenges that you discovered that you didn't think about before?
I think the first thing is a positive. I've sung so much. I've sung so many roles. I've been Fest in Germany for 7 years at 2 different theaters. If they put a score in front of me, I just say yes, and then I look at it later. Like, that's just always been my approach to everything. What surprised me the most is how well it fit vocally. It's low enough, Greer, you know this, it's low enough. We get asked as big, loud, Greer, I'm lumping myself in your category, which is outrageous. I never thought I would. But as big, loud, low voices, we tend to get asked by conductors and vocal coaches alike, sort of, we get this hand, like, oh, that's a little much, or make color here, or whatever. With Wotan, there's not that expectation, because number one, I can do it. It's low enough, and it's written in a tessitura, meaning for you, if you may not know the tessitura, how high or low a role is written for the entirety of the opera, the sort of where it lives. It's written in a way that, like, you can make color without working so hard. It's written in a way I finally felt like, dare I say, I finally sort of felt like a vocal artist. I felt like I could really, the same things that I like to bring to a Liederabend or to something a little less operatic and big, I was able to do that in Wotan. And then when the big is big, the orchestra's also big, and you got to step on it and go. Yeah. And I felt so, I felt so at home with it. So that's the positive. The negative would, or maybe not the negative, but the difficulty of it is Rheingold, especially in our production, you basically never leave the stage. So it's a 2.5 hour opera, which in Wagner standards, I mean, that's the normal length of any Verdi opera, but by Wagner standards, she's a little one, But when you never leave the stage and you have all these other people on stage, you have Albrecht, who was Mike Mays, who was incredible, and you have Brent Ryan, who was Loga, and you have all these other voices around you. What I found really difficult was how do I find the moments to be a little bit more ruhig, to be a little bit quieter, to be a little bit not just in my singing, but in my body, in my text, in my face. How do I find, it's really hard when you're a god to be innish, to be a little bit more thoughtful. And in Rheingold, he's so thoughtful, and he's so youthful, and he's sort of behind the 8 ball the entire time. Like, Loga's ahead of him the entire time. And so finding those colors, I thought was quite difficult. But again, that's just something that we work on in rehearsal and try to find.
It's interesting because he grows through the ring. You see a different Wotan.
Yeah.
And the Wotan that you meet in Rheingold is this young, I can do it, ambition. Then you meet him in Valkyrie, and it's a different person. And,
You have maybe a half an hour where he, not even that, with in that first scene with Brunhilde, and it's somewhat lustig, joyful, and easy. And then Fricka shows up, and then from that point on, it is a serious story. And the thing is that I just you look at it in this huge arc of the ring, and for me, I would write down certain ideas about what each one is about, and those things have evolved. And then I thought, okay, can we distill it to one thing? And for Rheingold, it is the exuberance of youth, as young as a god can be, and acquiring. He wants to, it's about acquiring this, acquiring that, messing around with, maybe the Rhine maidens, or, it's like all of these conquests. And in Valkyrie, you see a character who's having to deal with loss, and loss through, some twisted logic, because, he wasn't the only one that wanted the gold, but he's having to try to fix it for everyone from Valkyrie on. And so you have this character who is all about, yes, I'm going to go conquer conquer the world. I'm going to grab this gold. We'll have ultimate power. To Valkyrie, where Fricka, his wife, is absolutely right to call him on his BS, and he knows it, and he's left with this predicament, almost impossible predicament, of trying to fix it. How do I, and that's what this whole monologue that you spend, it's just as long as the second act of Tosca that you're dealing with trying to put it together. I need a hero, but I can't have a hero if I'm involved with the hero. It's, and so you have this at the end of it, he loses his wife, he loses his son, he loses his daughter, and then what? He's, and then also Sieglinde, he never sees Sieglinde again as well.
Right. But there's a certain growth, as a human being, because when you're young, you're just like, I want to have all those things, and as you get older, it gets more complicated because you now have kids, you now have a wife, and there are consequences for the time that you spend not focused on your family. Right.
And that's what I talk about too with singers will say, well, what's it like to do this or that? It is a sacrifice. There is a point where, what we do to earn a living, it takes us away from the people that we love the most and who may need us at certain times while we are away. And that's a sacrifice. And you know what? That's, that all goes into the coffer. Whether, it's like so many times, you sort of look up after, so many jobs and you go, oh, wow, wait a minute. I'm away too much here. It is a sacrifice. And, with that in mind, that's where Valkyrie sits, you are paying consequences.
Right. And I it's that old adage of, I had the unique opportunity to interview Sam Raimi, which was insane for any of us who love him. And he said that old adage of like, you don't get paid to sing. Singing's the greatest thing in the world. We get a ridiculous fee to do an awesome thing. You get paid to be away. You get paid to sacrifice. And I didn't really understand that quite that much until I had my first daughter, who's now 5. And my second daughter was born January 10th. Then we started rehearsals on January 14th. Luckily, she was born in Dallas where we were doing rehearsals. Thank God. But again, it's one of those things where like I'm now, because of passport issues and a bunch of other things, like the plan was to be all with the family in Munich. We live in Frankfurt. They're still in America. And so, I'm stuck. I'm stuck doing a role. I love, of course, the Bayerische Staatsoper is amazing and singing Caspar is amazing. That's all true and goes without saying. But I'm doing a role I've done before and I feel very confident on. So there's no like emergency like prep work on the way to rehearsal, reviewing text. I know it really well. I go to my 6 hours of rehearsal and then I'm left to sort of twiddle my thumbs and to FaceTime my family. And of course the guilt sets in of like, you want to be there so bad, but your wife is doing everything without you. And all of that comes with it. It's totally different thing. And so I think as much as we can bring into that, without, of course, letting it overtake us and becoming overwhelmed on stage, because as Marilyn Horne says, it's the audience's job to cry, not our job to cry. Yeah. And which I think is true, but like I do bring in so much of that, and so much of that sort of what we found in Dallas with the Fricka Wotan relationship was so dope, if I may use the terminology of a millennial. It was so cool because what we found this like color to where I think Fricka is kind of like sort of a naggy B word, if we will, in a lot of productions. But what we found in that was we found her just genuinely being like, have you thought this through? Is this something you really need to do? And it's conversations that my wife and I have all the time. And just to be quite honest, it's conversations we have about taking a gig. she'll sort of say like, well, we sacrificed this for the money, and now do we need to do this gig for this reason, and it'll take you away from your family more. And so those conversations in Rheingold, it can sound so often like Fricka's just sort of like getting at Wotan and trying to like get back at him. But what we found was just her just being the voice of reason to some degree, and finding these ideas of like, hey, yeah, you cool, you got the building is dope, cool, Valhalla's there, you did it, but like at what expense? And if you hear that as a Wotan who's just a husband in that moment, it's a very different thing than hearing it as a god who's just quick to dismiss her. You know?
Yeah.
And if you play it, I think if you don't play it like there is affection and love for each other, despite his rakishness, is that then that scene, that duet in Valkyrie, is not as powerful. So what you set up in Rheingold as a relationship with Fricka ends up being, the tragedy of the two of them parting ways.
But Greer, when you just do Rheingold, let's say you do Rheingold in a vacuum like you did in Minnesota or whatever, like we did in Dallas. You do Rheingold in a vacuum. If you do that just in a vacuum, are you thinking in that Rheingold, knowing you're not doing the other three, in at least within a year or whatever, do you think about that character arc the entire time?
No. It's that you, for me, it's staying, because you end up, he does, say to her, come with me,
Yeah.
And in that moment, I think there is some hope between the two of them. There is some sort of resolve that, they're, I mean, listen to the music, they're heading to this beautiful palace. Yeah. And then the second opera, you see the results of him not really thinking things through. And so I think of that, and I act that as if that's the last time we're going to see him. And
wow,
cool. Yeah,
that makes sense. It's interesting you mentioned Sam Raimi adage about how we don't pay you to sing, we pay you to be away from your families, because that's how I start every meeting that we have at the beginning of a production, is telling everybody thank you for being here, because as somebody who travels a lot with a family, the worst thing I feel that I can do to my family is be away from them. So thank you guys for being away from your families. It's a big sacrifice. Now, talk of which, your daughter, Nick, was born 4 days before we start rehearsals. And when I asked you about challenges of singing Wotan for the first time, you didn't mention that. How did that go with the 4-day-old baby in the house?
I think this is my like obligatory imperative plug for my wife. She's the most amazing human being in the world. She's also a full-time singer. And 27 days after she gave birth, she was covering Adalgisa at the Met, and she was in role for the first week. So, like, bow down to her. Like, if men had to give birth, we would have figured out cloning by now, because we could handle it. So that's that. That would be the first thing. The second thing would be, I don't know. Maybe this is crazy. There's a euphoria that comes, as the three of us know. There's a euphoria that comes with a new baby in your life. I have a 5-year-old who is incredible, and she'll watch this when she's 18 and say I didn't talk about her enough, so I need to mention her now. But I have a 5-year-old. I have a 5-year-old who's incredible, but she's at this point very self-sustainable. I mean, she makes her own breakfast in the morning. It's cereal, but still impressive. And she was going to a small little school there in Dallas, and she was happy. But there's a euphoria that comes with a new baby, where it's just sort of like, it's impossible to describe. And you start saying like very cliche things, like you never have anything like it. But there was this energy that I had, and this inspiration that I had, with somehow on 3.5, 4 hours of sleep, I was somehow able to do it. I was somehow able to get through it. And I will say the sort of worst part about that was after 2.5 weeks, my wife left to go cover at the Met, and I was supposed to pick my wife up at the air. I was supposed to drop my wife off at DFW and pick my mom up at the same time. We had it planned within an inch of its life. It was perfect. My mom got COVID the day before she was supposed to. She's fine, but she got COVID and she said, I can't come. You have a baby. So then for the end of Tech Week, very end of Tech Week, it was me alone with a 5-year-old and a
snowstorm.
In a
snowstorm.
I mean, literally, it was just like, what do we, at some point you just look up and you go, what are you throwing at me now? But again, you just sort of do it. Listen, I think a lot could be said, and Greer, this is something I would love to talk to you about either here or privately. There's a lot to be said for what age do you start singing this repertoire? And for me, I've already sung Corvinal, I've sung Hans Ochs, I've sung all these crazy things. But to me, I'm 33. 33 is still relatively young, and I had the energy for it. I had the ability to come in, and there were some days where the voice wasn't sitting completely correct, or there were days where my brain was completely fried, but I sort of, this is so eye-rolling and cliche to say, but when you walk in, I don't know. I've been very blessed to do an immense amount of repertoire in my 10 years on the opera stage. And there's something about singing Wotan. There's something about singing Rheingold where you walk into the room and you're like, today's going to be a good day. Am I in crappy voice? Who cares? Am I a little bit foggy? Fine. I'll figure it out. It's just, and especially it's like Greer, like you talk about it, just, when there's something that fits vocally so right for you, and this is something not enough people talk about. Sorry, I'm monologuing, but it's interesting. Not enough people talk about, oh, sure, you should wait on the big rep. Well, here's the thing. At 27, 26, 25, I absolutely could have sung a great Rigoletto. However, I would have had to have 10 days off silent before. I could do absolutely no rehearsal. And after that performance, I would have to basically take a humidifier and go into a dark room for 5 days. People don't talk about singing this big rep and rehearsing it. People don't talk about rehearsing it when you're not in great voice. People don't talk about, oh, there's orchestra call today and I'm a little thick, but I know I got to sing because there's orchestra. That to me was a big learning experience with Rheingold and understanding that, I can do this repertoire, and with gradations, of course, you have good days and bad days, but I can do this repertoire and I can handle the process. And I can handle even with a 3-week-old by myself. And so that was really an amazing experience, and ultimately one that I garner a lot of confidence from and a lot of encouragement from.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
That is awesome. Greer, you're coming into this after so many Wotans, and they say that no man walks into the same river twice because the river is not the same and the man is not the same, right?
Yeah.
So
I feel that. I love that. Yes.
Right. I mean, it's true, and I keep saying it to myself because I keep directing shows I've done before, and when I do Rigoletto now with 2 kids, thinking about the time that I directed it before having a kid. Understanding Rigoletto and Gilda is completely different for me. It's just a world apart. But as you think about it, 18 years into your exploration with the Ring, what would your advice to a young Greer 2005 be? Like, what would you say, hey, young Greer, you should know this about this guy?
I'm taking notes on my phone, so go ahead. By all means, answer this question.
You mean about the character?
About the character, and let me just explain a little more. When I did it for the first time in 2009, I was your age, Nick. I was 33. And my understanding of it, I believe, was limited. I understood some parts of it. I feel like today I understand a little more. It's a bit like The Giving Tree. The book The Giving Tree, where he gets older and older and he sees things differently. And I feel that there is a perspective as you get older and you have different relationships in your life that color the pieces that we're doing as artists in a different way. So today, from your vantage point, what do you see that you didn't see in 2005 of the character? Is there anything?
Well, because in 2005, it was all three operas for the first time staged. Oh. And so, I had come off of a year of learning, but what I wanted to do was I didn't, and I think Nick talked about this, is that you wanted to be fleshed out enough so someone wouldn't say, well, further down the line, this is going to be a fine Wotan or whatever role that you're doing. And so I think what I would say is just stay connected to the text, which is what I have found has helped me grow this character through the, really sort of sit and think about it. There are times where it's like you have, especially in Valkyrie, where you have like in the final scene with Brunhilde, you have two measures where you don't say a thing after she tells you something. It's like, why is that there? At the time in 2005, I was thinking, all right, I got to get this puppy up, and and we have to, and I want to see how this fits. That said, there was enough time rehearsing that I could sit back and look at it. What I would say to myself now is that don't sweat about singing it. You can sing it. I think as a young singer, we're always trying to prove ourselves. And, if does that ever really go away? I think we're always in one phase or another. There's always that mindfulness about, oh, does this sound okay? Is this going to be right? Or whatever. I would have said, don't even worry about that. You've done your preparation. You can sing this. And much like Nicholas has said, is that it felt right. It just felt right. And that's I do give that advice to young singers. Don't think that you have to do roles because a book says this voice type has to do these roles. Not all roles feel the same in your throat, even though it should, and it's just sort of taking that away. I have to say, I still remember that time, 2005 and even 2009, that that I think by the time we met in 2009, that I was starting to enjoy and not worry about things. I had been down that path before, so I knew where this little dip was going to be, or this hairpin turn was going to be, and so I had mapped out the role. But as you said, it's different every time. We wake up with our voices completely different from yesterday. So, there are just little nuances here and there that you just go, okay. But that would be what I would say. It's like, don't, you got this. It was an immense undertaking, I have to say. It took me a year to prepare. I had to, and I didn't get much warning about it. I can't remember why that happened, but when I was asked to do it, I immediately said yes, and then tried to figure out, okay, where can I fit in when I'm learning this? And I had to cancel a few jobs here and there, just to sort of be structured enough to do it.
Yeah, wow, that's amazing. I'm going to take myself out of the conversation for a second and let you guys have any questions you want to each other.
Okay.
So I have one queued up. I have one ready to go. So I mentioned it earlier, but from what I know, and this is all sort of like based on hearsay and other things. So I'm so excited to ask you in person. So, your first big Wagner role was Tellermund in Lohengrin, which is, and I said it, but it bears repeating, is the one that everyone tells you not to sing. It's the one that everyone's like, yo, if you want that to be the last job of your career, then take it. You'll be bleeding afterwards. Like, there's no chance. And so I want to ask you about that. Like, what was the thought process going into that? And was that a case of kind of F it, I'm young and dumb, let's do it, I don't know what I'm getting into? Or was that a sort of good foray into this repertoire?
That's a great question. and I would say it was a good foray into the repertoire. I have to say there was a little bit of ignorance involved.
Sure.
But it was, and once again, it can be a voice shredder if you're not nailed down technically. And I've always approached these roles, all of the, as lower male voices, we're thrown roles that are all over the place. Either you're a bad guy and you're shouting or whatever. It's just one of those things where I try to bring. I studied when I was younger. I studied bel canto technique, as most of us do, and I would try to sing it as beautifully as I could, but still have whatever meaning there was. I think if you listen to other people doing it who are not quite, second nature with some things in their technique,
sure,
then it's gonna show some fraying here and there. That said, there are hard parts in that opera,
sure.
but it's also staying connected to the character, and you have to think that he is of a royal status, and from that is your objection. So to make him into this screaming dog, I think shortchanges the character, because there has to be, he thinks he's right. Same thing as Scarpia. He's cruel, but he thinks he's right.
Sure.
Any of these guys who are, and that's my approach to villains, is that I try to find where their justification for doing what they do, and you find that all the time in the world with people who think that
sure,
they're right, but they're end up being real pains in the butt. It is through. Listen, I studied, and when I got the part, I prepared it with Henry Lewis, Marilyn Horne's husband and ex-husband, and he had a fantastic ear, and he helped me quite a bit with certain parts of it that I was having a little, just sort of connecting from one phrase to another. Once and it's just a question of staying open and learning from your experiences. That, my first Telramund, I ended up singing, I think it was like 4 or 5 performances in 7 days, because the second cast, Telramund had, who was a fine singer, but he got sick. And wow. So, yeah. And so the intendant came to me and said, do you think you can do, there's the young and dumb thing. Do you think you can do all the performances? I said, yeah, okay. And, I opened on Saturday night and sang a Sunday matinee. So it was a learning time. And you know what? I don't know if I would do that now, but it was you always hope that you can do that, but being honest with yourself as you grow and age as a singer is also part of the art of what we do.
Yeah, I did a Verdi Requiem Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday matinee. And that's and let's just put it this way. If that Sunday matinee had been live streamed, I might not have a career today. It was a rough one. But you do what you do. You sign up for it and you say yes. And it's crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, you guys, it's been amazing to talk with you. I loved so much what you said about the villains, Greer.
Yeah.
One of the characters that I'm surprised no real operas was written about was Napoleon. And Napoleon said something that I always keep in mind. He said, the hero of a tragedy, in order to interest us, should be neither wholly guilty nor wholly innocent. And this is from Napoleon, right? He totally got it.
Yeah.
You can't, there's no gray. Thank you for listening to the Atlanta Opera Das Rheingold Limited Series. Please follow us at the Atlanta Opera to stay up to date on our latest shows and events, and check out atlantaopera.org for more information. If you enjoyed this podcast, please rate and review it on Apple Podcasts. It's a great way for more people like you to find out about our content. And don't forget to follow the Atlanta Opera Podcast for more great episodes.